Who doesn't enjoy sitting in the satisfaction of a good clapback when we hear one or deliver it ourselves? While clapbacks are more commonly recognized in social discourse, online or in person, or perhaps your favorite reality TV show star, we have also been blessed with the gift of history making, academically rich, spiritually sound, and conscious shifting clapbacks as well. Enter the granddaddy clapback of them all. The response that is none other than Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Letter from Birmingham Jail. If you're like me, chances are you have heard of Letter from Birmingham Jail, but have only seen excerpts of the letter growing up and was never required to read it in school or taught the context behind its creation. Like the fact that Dr. King didn't write it just to write it. It was his response to insulting criticism. You see, what had happened was 8 white Alabama clergymen, 5 of whom were bishops, had written an open letter in a local newspaper opposing the nonviolent civil rights demonstrations that were taking place in Birmingham, Alabama at the time. One of their many criticisms included them saying these demonstrations were being led and directed in part by outsiders. Well, Dr. King caught that thinly veiled shade and knew they were referring to him, since he wasn't from Alabama. So it was on and poppin' for him to formulate his response. Now, we already know in hip-hop culture, you get a few hours to a few days to write a few verses of a response to clap back to a diss track. Dr. King's Letter from Birmingham Jail was written in the confines of a solitary confinement jail cell, mind you, started by him in the margins of the newspaper clipping of the open letter itself, continued on scraps of paper he had to have smuggled in, and completed on a pad his attorneys were eventually permitted to leave him. He completed his nearly 7,000 word response within 4 days, which, by the way, has been described as one of the most important historical documents of the civil rights movement. If that isn't the makings of the greatest clapback in American history, then I don't know what to tell you. In this special episode of the Mindshift Mami Show, I'll be exploring just one of the many key teachings we can take from this awe-inspiring, gem-encrusted, poetic collection of words that so eloquently encapsulates what makes a dignified clapback that rings with truth, wisdom, and lessons we can all learn from. By the end of this episode, you will understand how to apply this key learning to improve multiple aspects of your life, from personal growth and relationships to how we can continue Dr. King's legacy and do our part to elevate our communities and society by living more in alignment with our values. But first, if you're new here, welcome or welcome back. My name is Jazri, and I discuss all sorts of topics centered around shifting our mindsets and living into our most authentic and fulfilling lives. So if that's what you're into, be sure to subscribe and join our community. Let's get into it. So one of the many things that these clergymen were complaining about was the direct action the civil rights activists were taking when they were doing things such as sit-ins at lunch counters who wouldn't serve Black people and marches to segregated areas. The clergymen argued that the protesters should be working on negotiations instead, which Dr. King replied in way more eloquent terms, "Yeah, I agree with you. Going straight to negotiations would be ideal, except this community is literally refusing to meet with us." That was the very purpose of him taking direct action to, quote, influence nonviolent tension to create a situation so crisis-packed that it will inevitably open the door for negotiation. Dr. King wrote that the direct actions of sit-ins and marches were not acts of chaos, as the clergymen had suggested, but instead deliberate efforts to create what he called a type of constructive nonviolent tension, which is necessary for growth. This idea of this nonviolent tension is profound. It's something we can all learn from, yes, in the context of social change, but in so many aspects of our personal lives as well. That is why today's teaching is the role of tension in growth. I need to take a quick pause here and just acknowledge something. Dr. King made so many impressive references and quotes throughout his entire letter that you would have thought he had access to his personal library in that solitary confinement jail cell. When you read his entire letter and all the references he's able to pull upon from his memory to back up and support his thought process and his arguments, just knowing he was writing this cordial, classy clapback on scraps of paper in a dark cell as a political prisoner is quite literally nothing short of amazing. So in his letter, Dr. King references Socrates, the philosopher, who believed in creating, quote, a tension of the mind so that individuals could break free from the, quote, bondage of myths and half-truths. Bondage of myths and half-truths, which is language and a concept that is still very relevant and necessary for us today. This mental tension was a necessary step to achieve growth, stepping into a realm of creative analysis and truth-seeking. So basically thinking critically for ourselves and not believing everything we see and hear at face value. In the same way, Dr. King argued that nonviolent direct action created societal tension, not to destroy, but to inspire similar growth and understanding. The goal was to move society from the, quote, dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood. Both of these men's concepts of necessary tension encourage us to move from ignorance to open-mindedness. So when we think about growth, real, transformative growth, it cannot happen in comfort. I'm sorry if that is a shock to anyone, but I think we as people really do be forgetting that. Any type of growth or advancement in life and in society requires us to lean into tension, to embrace discomfort, and to see it as a tool for progress. If we look at tension and things that make us uncomfy as a nuisance, as something we don't want to deal with and ignore, what do we think is going to happen? I'll tell you what's going to happen. We're going to stay exactly where we are and never move through it to the other side where progress is waiting for us. This is what the clergymen were missing in their uninformed letter. They wanted everyone to stay put and wait for things to be worked out without tension. And while they may have meant good, their words were very harmful and extremely inconsiderate. The bottom line is the direct action, non-violent direct action, mind you, that civil rights activists were taking was making the clergymen and other white people uncomfy because it shined a light on the injustices that segregation imposed, and they wanted to remain comfortable. Which is exactly why Dr. King had to gather these clergymen in his letter. Dr. King went into a whole tangent where he started it with, perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. And then he went into this whole thing when he was saying, but when you seen your mothers and fathers lynched, brothers and sisters drowned, people smothering in poverty, you getting tongue twisted because you have to tell your 6-year-old daughter she can't go to the amusement park she saw in a commercial because it's closed to colored children, thus negatively impacting your daughter's concept of herself. When you have to go take a cross-country drive and sleep in the corners of your uncomfortable car because no motel will accept you, when you're being humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs that read white and colored, Living constantly in anxiety, never knowing what to expect next, plagued with inner fears and resentments, when you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, he finishes this whole thing with, I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. Gagged. Clock it. Clock it. We understand now that when we are dealing with societal injustices and oppression, applying tension to the status quo and the willingness to go through that tension are necessary steps for liberation. Let's now apply this concept of necessary tension in the context of personal goals. For instance, if you're working on a fitness goal, like building strength or endurance, the process inherently involves tension. When you push yourself a little harder during a workout, when your muscles are burning or your heart's pounding, that's tension. And that's what makes you stronger. Without that resistance, there's no growth. You might as well just sit on your couch. There was a point where I had been going to spinning classes for months, but I was still keeping myself at the same tension levels on my bike, not pushing myself to raise the level because I was comfortable and I didn't want to feel too much tension. However, I know that I want to see progress in my body. I want to see the results of me spending my time going to these classes. But I cannot be acting confused when I'm not seeing the results I want to see on the scale or in the mirror. I needed to remind myself, yeah, it is gonna be harder to push the pedals for a bit. I'm not gonna be right on beat with the songs playing right away because there's an added tension that I have to grow and work through first. So by committing to that, by me accepting that, yes, I will be uncomfortable for a little while. This might even kind of suck. Over time, I will grow through it and it will get easier and I will be that much stronger for having gone through that initial tension. Once I started applying that, I began to see the inevitable results of pushing myself in my workouts. And it's not just about physical challenges when it comes to our personal lives. Tension plays a critical role in our relationships too. How often do we avoid difficult conversations because they feel uncomfortable? Maybe it's a conversation with a partner about unmet needs or issues you've been avoiding. Maybe it's a discussion with a family member about differing values, boundaries, or how you experience them. Or perhaps it's standing up for what's right in a workplace or a community space. These moments can feel overwhelming with tension. But avoiding moving through that tension only leads to stagnation, not growth. I have found myself in all of these scenarios where I felt incredibly uncomfortable tension. But when I decided that I had had enough of avoidance and was going to push through it, the rewards that I reaped on the other side of that tension made it worth going through. I have had incredibly difficult conversations with my parents regarding my experience of our relationship that on the other side has created a more authentic and close relationship between us. I have faced workplace issues that challenged my moral compass over the status quo. And as challenging and nerve-wracking as it was to go through all the tension and the discomfort and what felt like me going against a machine, on the other side of that tension, I saw positive changes occur within the ecosystem. And more importantly, I regained a power within myself that I only was able to realize from deciding, you know what? I'm gonna weather the possible storm that may come my way, despite how big it appears. And the great thing we learn about challenging ourselves and moving through tension is the realization we are always stronger and more capable of handling it than we initially assume we are. Dr. King's letter reminds us that constructive tension is essential for change. When it comes to conversations about social justice and racial equity, many of us have been conditioned to prioritize harmony over truth. We don't speak about the topics that are hot button items or that we know people have strong differing opinions about. We are afraid of the necessary tension the conversation creates. But as Dr. King pointed out, that kind of false peace only perpetuates injustice. Growth requires us to sit in the discomfort of these conversations, to challenge assumptions and misinformation, and to push ourselves and others towards deeper understanding and action. So here's your mind shift for today. The next time you're faced with tension, whether it's physical, emotional, societal, try to reframe it. Instead of seeing it as something to avoid, recognize it as a sign that you're on the edge of growth. Ask yourself, what's on the other side of this discomfort? Chances are it's something worth striving for, be it greater strength, deeper connection, or a more just and equitable world. Create your own clapback of greatness. And do yourself a favor today. If you haven't done it recently, please go ahead and read the thought-provoking message that is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Letter from Birmingham Jail. Like I said, this concept of necessary nonviolent tension is just one of the countless gems he dropped in there. I might even do additional episodes dedicated to some more concepts, but I don't want you to miss out on any of them, so make sure you go ahead and read that. Now, let's get into our affirmations inspired by Dr. King's letter and his emphasis on the role of necessary tension for growth. I welcome challenges as opportunities to grow stronger and wiser. I welcome challenges as opportunities to grow stronger and wiser. Every moment I push through tension is a step toward my personal evolution. Every moment I push through tension is a step toward my personal evolution. I trust that every challenge I face is shaping me into a stronger and more resilient person. I trust that every challenge I face is shaping me into a stronger and more resilient person. I am open to the lessons that discomfort and tension bring into my life. I am open to the lessons that discomfort and tension bring into my life. I am willing to face hard truths to live in alignment with my highest values. I am willing to face hard truths to live in alignment with my highest values. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Mindshift Mami Show. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe, share this episode with someone who needs a little inspiration, and join me next time as we continue to explore the power of mindset shifts for a better life. Until then, stay bold, stay intentional, and keep leaning into your growth. Take care. Bye, guys.